In the heart of a busy city, where skyscrapers touched the clouds and streets buzzed with people rushing to their destinations, there lived a woman who had seen more hardship than most. Her name was Mariah Johnson, a kind-hearted soul in her late 20s with deep brown skin that told stories of resilience. Life hadn't been easy for Mariah. She grew up bouncing from one foster home to another, never staying long enough to put down roots or feel like she truly belonged anywhere. Mariah worked as a cashier at a small grocery store tucked away on a quiet corner of the city. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills, and she always greeted customers with a warm smile. Despite her struggles, Mariah carried herself with grace and dignity. She often dreamed of having a family, a place where she could come home to hugs, laughter, and unconditional love. But those dreams felt distant, almost impossible, given everything she'd been through. One chilly winter evening, as snowflakes began drifting lazily from the gray sky, Mariah wrapped her coat tightly around herself and prepared to walk home after finishing her shift. The air bit at her cheeks, and the icy wind made her pull her scarf closer to her neck. As she crossed the street near the park, something caught her attention out of the corner of her eye. An elderly man was struggling to make his way across the slippery road, leaning heavily on a wooden cane. His steps were slow and uncertain, each movement cautious as if he feared losing his balance. And then it happened. He slipped. The cane skidded out of his grip and he tumbled onto the frozen pavement with a thud. Mariah's heart sank. Without thinking twice, she sprinted toward him, her boots crunching against the thin layer of snow. "Are you okay?" she asked breathlessly, kneeling beside him. His face was pale, and his hands trembled slightly as he tried to push himself up. "I'm fine," he muttered gruffly, though his voice betrayed his pain. "Just give me a moment." But Mariah wasn't about to leave him there. She gently helped him sit upright, brushing off the snow clinging to his thick woolen coat. Up close, she noticed how frail he looked, his silver hair dusted with frost, his glasses slightly askew on his nose. His eyes, however, held a spark of determination despite his weakened state. "You shouldn't be walking alone in this weather," Mariah said firmly. "Let me help you get home." The man hesitated, pride warring with gratitude. Finally, he nodded. "All right, thank you. My apartment isn't far from here." As they slowly made their way down the icy sidewalk, Mariah looped her arm through his to steady him. They moved at a snail's pace, but neither seemed to mind. In fact, the silence between them soon gave way to conversation. The man introduced himself as Harold Whitmore, a retired schoolteacher who had spent decades shaping young minds before retiring to a quieter life. He spoke fondly of his late wife, whose memory still lingered in every corner of his home, and his children, who lived far away and rarely visited. Listening to Harold talk, Mariah couldn't help but notice the loneliness in his voice. It mirrored her own feelings of isolation, though their circumstances were different. While Harold missed the warmth of family gatherings and familiar faces, Mariah yearned for the very thing he took for granted: a family to call her own. By the time they reached Harold's modest apartment building, Mariah felt an unexpected connection to this stranger. There was something comforting about the way he listened to her when she spoke, nodding thoughtfully as she shared bits and pieces of her own story. When they finally stepped inside his cozy apartment, the scent of old books and cinnamon filled the air. It felt lived in, welcoming, and strangely familiar. Harold insisted on making tea, refusing to let Mariah leave without warming up first. As they sat together, sipping hot cups of chamomile, their conversation deepened. Harold opened up about how much he missed teaching, how proud he was of his kids even though they didn't visit often, and how empty the house felt without his wife. Mariah, in turn, talked about growing up in foster care, the constant moving, and the ache of not knowing what it felt like to belong somewhere. For the first time in years, Mariah found herself opening up completely to someone. She didn't have to pretend to be strong or hide the cracks in her armor. Harold listened patiently, his kind eyes reflecting understanding rather than pity. By the end of the evening, both of them felt a warmth they hadn't experienced in a long time. a glimmer of hope amidst the cold, lonely world outside. Little did they know, this chance encounter would set into motion a series of events that would change their lives forever. What started as a simple act of kindness on a snowy night would soon unravel secrets buried deep in the past, bringing two lost souls together in ways neither could have imagined. Over the next few days, Mariah couldn't stop thinking about Harold. There was something about him that stayed with her long after their first meeting, a mix of warmth and sadness that reminded her of herself. She found herself worrying about him, wondering if he was managing okay on his own. The image of him slipping on the icy road replayed in her mind, making her realize just how vulnerable he seemed. On her way home from work one evening, she decided to stop by his apartment building. It wasn't far out of her way, and she told herself it was just to check in, to make sure he hadn't hurt himself when he fell. But deep down, she knew there was more to it. She wanted to see him again. Something about their conversation had left an impression on her heart, and she craved that sense of connection they'd shared. When she knocked on his door, Harold's face lit up with surprise and delight. "Mariah, what a pleasant surprise," he said, ushering her inside. His voice carried a note of genuine happiness, as though her visit had brightened his day. Mariah smiled shyly, suddenly feeling unsure of herself. Was she intruding? Did he even want company? "I just wanted to make sure you were doing all right," she explained, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "After what happened the other night, I thought, well, maybe I should check in." Harold chuckled softly, waving off her concern. "I'm fine, really. Just a little bruised pride, nothing serious. But I appreciate your thoughtfulness." He paused, studying her for a moment before adding, "Would you like some tea?" The offer felt like an invitation, not just for tea but for something deeper, a chance to spend more time together. Mariah nodded, and soon they were seated at his small kitchen table, cups of steaming tea between them. The cozy atmosphere made it easy to talk, and once again their conversation flowed naturally. This time Harold asked more about Mariah's life. He listened intently as she spoke about growing up in foster care, moving from one home to another without ever finding a place where she truly fit. Her words were tinged with sadness but also resilience. She didn't dwell on the hardships. Instead, she focused on how those experiences shaped her into the person she was today. Strong, compassionate, and determined to make the most of her life. "You've been through so much," Harold said quietly, his eyes filled with admiration. "And yet here you are, still willing to help someone like me. That takes a special kind of strength." Mariah blushed at his praise, looking down at her tea. "It's not that big a deal," she murmured. "Anyone would have done the same." "But," Harold shook his head firmly, "no, they wouldn't. Not everyone has your heart, Mariah. You remind me so much of my daughter. You have her kindness." His words caught her off guard, stirring emotions she hadn't expected. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it might feel like to be part of a family, to have someone look at her the way Harold looked at her now. It was a fleeting thought, quickly pushed aside, but it lingered in the back of her mind. As the weeks went by, Mariah continued visiting Harold regularly. At first, she told herself it was purely out of concern for his safety. After all, he was elderly and lived alone. Someone needed to keep an eye on him, right? But over time, she realized it wasn't just about duty, it was about friendship. Harold had become someone she genuinely cared about, someone who made her feel seen and valued in a way she never had before. Their bond grew stronger with each visit. Harold loved sharing stories about his life, the years he spent teaching history, to high school students the adventures he and his late wife had taken together, the joy of raising their children. Listening to him, Mariah felt transported to another world, one full of love and laughter. She envied the life he described, wishing she could experience even a fraction of that closeness. In turn, Harold encouraged Mariah to open up about her dreams and aspirations. He was fascinated by her ambition and determination, often telling her she reminded him of himself when he was younger. "You're going places," he'd say with a proud smile. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." One afternoon, while helping Harold organize some old boxes in his study, Mariah stumbled upon a dusty photo album tucked away on a shelf. Curious, she pulled it down and flipped it open. The pages were filled with faded photographs capturing moments frozen in time, family gatherings, vacations, birthdays. As she turned the pages, one picture stopped her cold. It was a black and white photograph of a young girl, no older than 2 or 3, sitting on Harold's lap. Her curly hair framed her cherubic face, and her wide grin radiated pure joy. Standing beside them was Harold's wife, her arm draped lovingly around the child. The resemblance was uncanny. The girl looked strikingly similar to Mariah. Her breath caught in her throat. "Who is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Harold glanced over, his expression softening as he recognized the photo. For a moment he hesitated as though debating whether to answer. Then, with a heavy sigh, he sat down beside her. "That's a story I haven't told anyone in a long time," he admitted. "It's complicated." Mariah stared at him, her curiosity piqued. "Complicated how?" Harold leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant as if lost in memory. "Years ago, before we had our biological children, my wife and I fostered a baby girl. She came to us when she was just a newborn, and we loved her like our own. We named her Mariah." Mariah's heart skipped a beat. "Mariah?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "What happened to her?" Harold's shoulders slumped, weighed down by the weight of the past. "We did everything we could to adopt her, but circumstances didn't allow it. Financial struggles, legal complications, it was a different time, and things weren't as straightforward as they are now. Eventually, we had to let her go. It broke both our hearts." Tears welled up in Mariah's eyes as she stared at the photograph. Could it be possible? Could the baby Harold and his wife had fostered all those years ago be her? The timeline matched perfectly. She had been born around the same time and had spent her early years bouncing between foster homes. Her chest tightened as 1,000 questions swirled in her mind. "Do you remember anything else about her?" she asked cautiously, trying to keep her voice steady. "Anything at all?" Harold nodded slowly. She had the biggest smile, always lighting up the room. And her laugh, it was infectious. "Even after all these years, I can still hear it in my dreams." Mariah swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she closed the photo album. She wanted to tell him, to ask outright if the baby he had loved and lost could somehow be her. But fear held her back. What if she was wrong? What if this was just a coincidence? She needed proof before she could confront him with such a monumental question. For the rest of the visit, Mariah struggled to focus. Her mind raced with possibilities, each one more overwhelming than the last. As she prepared to leave, Harold walked her to the door, his usual warmth replaced by a quiet melancholy. "Thank you for spending time with me today," he said softly. "You have no idea how much it means to me." Mariah forced a smile, though. Her heart felt heavy. "Thank you for sharing your stories with me," she replied. "They mean a lot to me, too." As she stepped out into the crisp evening air, Mariah knew one thing for certain. She needed answers. Whatever the truth was, she owed it to herself and to Harold to find out. The days following that discovery felt like a whirlwind for Mariah. Every moment of her life suddenly seemed to revolve around one burning question. Could Harold Whitmore, the kind elderly man she had grown so fond of, be connected to her past in a way she never imagined? The photograph haunted her thoughts, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw the little girl sitting on Harold's lap. The smile, the curls, the unmistakable resemblance. It was as if the universe was pushing her toward an answer she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Mariah knew she couldn't just sit around waiting for clarity. She needed to dig deeper into her own history, even if it meant confronting painful memories she had tried to bury. The next morning, after another restless night, she called the social services office where her records were kept. Her heart pounded, as she explained her situation to the caseworker on the other end of the line. "I need to know more about my early years," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "Specifically, who took care of me when I was a baby?" The caseworker promised to look into it and get back to her within a few days. While waiting, Mariah threw herself into work and her visits with Harold, trying to distract herself from the gnawing uncertainty. But no matter how hard she tried, the question lingered in the back of her mind. Was Harold really part of her story? And if he was, what did that mean for both of them? When the call finally came, Mariah's hands trembled as she held the phone. The caseworker confirmed what she had suspected but barely dared to hope. As an infant, she had been placed in foster care with a couple named Harold and Margaret Whitmore. They had cared for her for nearly 2 years before financial difficulties forced them to give her up. After that, she had been moved through several other homes until she aged out of the system entirely. Hearing those words hit Mariah like a tidal wave. Tears streamed down her face as the pieces fell into place. Harold wasn't just some stranger she had helped on a snowy night. He was the man who had once loved her as his own daughter. He was the missing link to a family she had always longed for, but never believed she could find. For hours, Mariah sat alone in her tiny apartment, grappling with the weight of this revelation. Part of her wanted to rush over to Harold's house and tell him everything right away. Another part of her hesitated, afraid of how he might react. Would he remember her? Would he feel guilty for not fighting harder to keep her? Or worse, what if he didn't want her in his life now? Finally, after much deliberation, she decided to confront him. She owed it to both of them to be honest. That evening, armed with nothing but courage and a box of old photographs she had brought along, Mariah knocked on Harold's door. When he opened it, his face lit up as usual. "Mariah, come in," he said warmly, ushering her inside. But as soon as he saw the seriousness in her expression, his smile faltered. "Is everything all right?" Mariah took a deep breath, clutching the photo album tightly against her chest. "I need to ask you something important," she began, her voice wavering slightly. "Something that, well, it's going to sound crazy, but I think it's true." Harold gestured for her to sit, his brow furrowed with concern. "Go ahead, dear. You can tell me anything." She hesitated for a moment, then pulled out the black and white photograph she had found earlier. Placing it gently on the table between them, she pointed to the little girl in the picture. "Do you recognize her?" she asked softly. Harold picked up the photo, his fingers tracing the edges as if trying to bring it back to life. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, followed by confusion. This is the baby we fostered all those years ago," he murmured. "But why are you showing me this?" Mariah swallowed hard, her pulse racing. "Because I know that baby is me." The room fell silent. Harold stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then slowly, he reached for her hand, his grip trembling. "Are you saying—" Tears spilled down Mariah's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes. I'm saying I'm the little girl you and your wife loved all those years ago. I'm the one you lost." Harold's face crumpled, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "Oh, my dear child," he whispered, pulling her into a tight embrace. "My sweet Mariah. Is it really you?" They clung to each other, sobbing, uncontrollably, as decades of separation melted away in that single moment. For Harold, it was like finding a piece of his heart he thought he'd lost forever. For Mariah, it was finally coming home. Over the next hour, they talked nonstop, filling in the gaps of their shared history. Harold told her everything he remembered about those 2 precious years when she had been part of his family. The late-night feedings, the first steps, the laughter that filled their home. He also confessed the pain and regret he had carried ever since they had to let her go. "We tried so hard to adopt you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But the system didn't make it easy for us back then. We fought until we had nothing left, but in the end we had to let you go. It broke our hearts, Mariah, your mother's especially. She never stopped wondering what became of you." Mariah listened intently, her heart swelling with love and forgiveness. She understood now why Harold had always seemed so familiar, why their connection had felt so natural from the start. It wasn't just coincidence, it was destiny. As the initial shock wore off, Harold grew quieter, his expression turning thoughtful. "You must have so many questions," he said finally. "About your mother, about our family." Mariah nodded. "I do. But mostly, I just want to know more about you. About us." Harold smiled through his tears. "Then let's start at the beginning. There's so much I want to share with you." He led her to the living room, where they settled onto the couch surrounded by photo albums and mementos from his past. One by one, he showed her pictures of her childhood, her chubby cheeks, her infectious laugh, the way she used to cling to Margaret's apron strings in the kitchen. Each image painted a vivid picture of the family she had unknowingly been searching for all her life. By the time they finished, it was late into the night, but neither of them felt tired. Instead, they were energized by the rediscovery of their bond. Harold insisted Mariah stay for dinner, cooking up a simple meal of spaghetti and garlic bread while reminiscing about Margaret's famous recipes. As they ate together, Mariah realized something profound. This was what family felt like. Not the fleeting connections she had experienced in foster homes or the loneliness she had endured for so long, but real, unconditional love. And for the first time in her life, she felt whole. Before leaving that night, Harold walked her to the door, his arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. "You're not losing me again," he said firmly. "From now on, you're staying with me. No arguments." Mariah looked up at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." And as she stepped out into the cool night air, she knew her life would never be the same. She had found the family she had always dreamed of, not through luck or chance, but through love that had survived the test of time. The days that followed the revelation were a whirlwind of emotions for both Mariah and Harold. Neither of them had expected their lives to take such a dramatic turn, but neither could deny the overwhelming sense of rightness they felt in each other's presence. For Mariah, it was as if she had been wandering through life with a giant puzzle missing its final piece, and now, suddenly, everything fit together perfectly. For Harold, it was like finding a long-lost treasure he never thought he'd see again. Harold wasted no time in making sure Mariah felt welcome in his home. He insisted she move in immediately, offering her the spare bedroom that had once belonged to his late wife. "This room hasn't been used in years," he told her, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "But I think Margaret would approve of you staying here. She always hoped we'd find you someday." Mariah couldn't help but smile at the thought. Though she had only seen pictures of Margaret, she already felt a deep connection to the woman who had loved her as a baby. It was strange how quickly someone could become part of your story, even when you hadn't met them in person. Every corner of Harold's home seemed to hold memories of Margaret, her favorite books on the shelves, her handwritten recipes in the kitchen, and the faint scent of lavender that still lingered in the air. Mariah found herself imagining what it might have been like to grow up surrounded by such warmth and love. As the weeks passed, their bond grew stronger with every shared meal, every evening spent talking over cups of tea, and every quiet moment of simply being together. Harold introduced Mariah to all the little traditions he and Margaret had cherished: Sunday morning pancakes, afternoon walks in the park, and Friday night movie marathons. At first, Mariah hesitated to embrace these routines, feeling unsure if she deserved to step into the life Harold and Margaret had built together. But Harold wouldn't hear of it. "You're not replacing anyone," he assured her one evening, as they sat side by side on the couch, flipping through old photo albums. "You're adding to our family. Margaret would have wanted this for us to be happy to keep moving forward." His words brought tears to Mariah's eyes, but they also gave her the courage to let herself belong. Slowly, she began to settle into her new life, finding comfort in the familiarity of Harold's home and the rhythm of their daily routines. One day, while helping Harold clean out the attic, Mariah stumbled upon a box labeled Memories. Inside were mementos from his teaching career, yearbooks, report cards, and letters from former students. As she sifted through the contents, she came across a faded journal with Margaret's name written neatly on the cover. Curious, she opened it and discovered pages filled with handwritten notes and sketches. Some entries described their early days as foster parents, capturing moments of joy and frustration as they navigated parenthood for the first time. Others spoke of their dreams for the future, the family they hoped to build, and the legacy they wanted to leave behind. Mariah read the journal carefully, her heart swelling with emotion as she pieced together more of her own history. In one entry, Margaret wrote about the day they brought Mariah home. She's so tiny, yet her presence fills the entire house. Her laugh is music to our ears, and her smile lights up even the darkest corners of our hearts. We'll do whatever it takes to give her a good life. Holding the journal close, Mariah felt a lump rise in her throat. These words weren't just fragments of someone else's past, they were her story too. They reminded her of how deeply she had been loved, even during the brief time she spent with Harold and Margaret. And they gave her hope that despite the challenges ahead, she could rebuild the family she had lost. When Harold found her sitting cross-legged on the attic floor, clutching the journal to her chest, he smiled knowingly. "I see you've discovered Margaret's secret stash," he said with a chuckle, lowering himself onto the dusty floor beside her. "She wrote about me," Mariah said softly, handing him the journal. "About how much she loved me." Harold nodded, his eyes glistening with tears. "She did. Every word she wrote came from the heart. Losing you broke her, but she never stopped hoping we'd find you again." They sat there for a while, shoulder to shoulder, reading through the journal together. Each page brought them closer, weaving together the threads of their shared past. By the time they finished, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the attic in a warm, golden glow. Over dinner that night, Harold broached a subject he had been thinking about for some time. "Have you ever thought about reaching out to my kids?" he asked cautiously. "Your siblings, I mean, they deserve to know about you." Mariah froze, her fork hovering midway between her plate and her mouth. The idea of meeting Harold's biological children, a son and a daughter who had grown up without knowing she existed, was daunting. What if they resented her? What if they didn't accept her as part of the family? "I don't know," she admitted after a pause. "What if they don't want me around? I don't want to cause trouble." Harold reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "Trouble? Nonsense. You're their sister whether they realize it yet or not. And trust me, once they get to know you, they'll see what an incredible gift you are." Though hesitant, Mariah agreed to let Harold reach out to his children. He promised to handle the situation delicately, giving them time to process the news before introducing her. True to his word, Harold sent letters to both his son and daughter, explaining the extraordinary circumstances that had led to Mariah's return. He emphasized that this wasn't about replacing anyone. It was about expanding their family in a way none of them could have anticipated. To everyone's surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Harold's son, who lived several states away, called immediately to express his shock and excitement. "Dad, why didn't you tell me sooner?" he exclaimed, his voice brimming with emotion. "Of course, we want to meet her." His daughter, who had been distant for years, surprised them all by showing up at Harold's doorstep just days later. When Mariah answered the door, she found herself face to face with a woman who looked remarkably like Harold, with the same kind eyes and gentle smile. "Hi," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Emily. Dad told me everything. I can't believe you're really here." Mariah shook her hand, her nerves melting away under Emily's genuine warmth. Over coffee and homemade cookies, the three of them talked for hours, sharing stories and laughter as though they had known each other forever. It was clear that Emily and her brother were eager to make up for lost time, welcoming Mariah into their lives with open arms. As the weeks turned into months, Mariah found herself embraced by a family she had never dreamed possible. Harold continued to dote on her, spoiling her with hugs and encouragement. Emily and her brother made an effort to include Mariah in family gatherings, holidays, and milestones. Even Harold's grandchildren warmed to her quickly, treating her like the aunt they had always wished for. Through it all, Mariah learned valuable lessons about forgiveness, acceptance, and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. She realized that families aren't defined solely by blood or birth. They're built on connections, shared experiences, and the willingness to embrace one another despite imperfections. One evening, as she stood beside Harold at a family barbecue, watching the laughter and chatter unfold around them, Mariah felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had started this journey searching for belonging, and now, against all odds, she had found it. Not just in Harold, but in the entire family who had welcomed her with open hearts. Looking up at Harold, she smiled. "Thank you," she said, simply, her voice filled with emotion. "For everything." Harold wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "No, my dear," he replied, his eyes twinkling with pride. "Thank you for coming back to us." Life with Harold and his extended family had become a beautiful tapestry of new beginnings, but it wasn't without its challenges. Mariah quickly realized that blending into a family she had never known required patience, understanding, and a willingness to navigate uncharted waters. For all the love and warmth they offered, there were moments when the differences in their lives and the years they had spent apart created friction. At first, everything seemed perfect. The initial joy of discovering their connection carried them through weeks of excitement and bonding. But as time went on, small cracks began to show. Harold's children, though eager to include Mariah, struggled with feelings of guilt and confusion. They had grown up believing their parents' foster care experience was a closed chapter, something tucked away in the past. Now, faced with the reality of Mariah's existence, they couldn't help but wonder why this part of their family history had been kept hidden for so long. One afternoon, during a casual lunch at Harold's house, Emily, the daughter who had initially welcomed Mariah with open arms, brought up the topic hesitantly. "Dad," she began, her voice tinged with uncertainty, "why didn't you ever tell us about her before? About fostering Mariah?" Harold paused mid-bite, his fork hovering above his plate. He exchanged a glance with Mariah, who sat quietly beside him, sensing the weight of the question. It was clear Emily wasn't accusing anyone of wrongdoing. She simply wanted answers. "I suppose we thought it was easier to leave it in the past," Harold admitted after a moment. His tone was gentle but tinged with regret. "Margaret and I carried that loss with us every day, and talking about it only made it harder. We didn't want to burden you kids with our pain." Emily nodded slowly, absorbing his words. "But it feels like we missed out too. On knowing her, I mean. Knowing her story." Mariah leaned forward, placing a reassuring hand on Emily's arm. "I understand how you feel," she said softly. "For most of my life, I didn't know where I came from either. Finding Harold and all of you has given me answers I didn't think I'd ever have. But I also know it's not easy to suddenly add someone new to your family tree." Her honesty broke the tension in the room. Emily smiled faintly, gratitude flickering in her eyes. "You're right," she said. "It's just going to take some getting used to, for all of us." That conversation marked the start of a deeper effort to bridge the gap between them. Over the following weeks, Mariah made a conscious effort to spend more time with Harold's children, learning about their lives and sharing pieces of her own. She joined Emily for coffee dates, listened to stories about her childhood, and even helped her sort through old family photos. With Harold's son, she bonded over shared interests like cooking and music, discovering unexpected similarities that brought them closer together. Still, not every interaction was smooth sailing. There were moments of awkwardness, miscommunication, and even jealousy. One evening, while attending a family dinner at Harold's house, Mariah overheard a whispered argument between Emily and her brother. "She gets all the attention now," he muttered under his breath, gesturing toward Mariah. "It's like Dad doesn't notice anyone else anymore." Mariah froze, her heart sinking. Though she hadn't meant to eavesdrop, the comment stung. She knew the attention she received from Harold wasn't intentional. It stemmed from decades of longing and love. But hearing it framed as neglect hurt nonetheless. Rather than confront him directly, Mariah decided to address the issue indirectly. The next day, she visited Harold's son at his workshop, where he spent hours tinkering with woodworking projects. She found him sanding a piece of oak, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Hey," she said gently, leaning against the doorway. "Mind if I join you?" He looked up startled, then nodded. "Sure, pull up a chair." For a while they worked side by side in companionable silence, Mariah handing him tools and watching as he transformed raw wood into something beautiful. Finally, she spoke. "I heard what you said last night," she admitted, her voice steady, but kind. "About feeling overlooked." His cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Oh yeah, look, I didn't mean—" "It's okay," Mariah interrupted. "I get it. This whole situation is weird for everyone. But I want you to know, I'm not here to take anything away from you or Emily. I finally found the family I've always dreamed of, and I don't want to mess that up." Her vulnerability disarmed him. Setting down his tools, he sighed heavily. "I guess I've been selfish," he admitted. "It's just hard sometimes seeing Dad so happy with you. Not because I don't want him to be happy. It's just different, you know?" Mariah nodded. "Different can be good," she said, with a smile. "And maybe over time it'll feel less strange. We can figure it out together." From that moment on, their relationship began to shift. Slowly but surely, Harold's son started including Mariah in his hobbies, inviting her to help with projects or teaching her basic carpentry skills. In return, Mariah encouraged him to share his thoughts and feelings openly, creating space for honest conversations that strengthened their bond. Meanwhile, Mariah continued to deepen her connection with Harold. Their days were filled with laughter, storytelling, and quiet moments of reflection. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Harold turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "You've changed everything for me, you know," he said softly. "Having you back has given me a second chance, a chance to make things right." Mariah reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "You've given me a second chance too," she replied. "A chance to belong somewhere, to be part of something bigger than myself." Their relationship wasn't without its bittersweet moments. Sometimes Harold would reminisce about Margaret, his late wife, and the dreams they had shared for their family. "She would have loved seeing you again," he often said, his voice thick with emotion. "She always believed we'd find you someday." Though Margaret was no longer there to witness their reunion, Mariah felt her presence in subtle ways. In the recipes Harold taught her, the photographs lining the walls, and the love that permeated every corner of their home. She came to view Margaret not as a distant memory, but as a guiding force who had shaped the family she now belonged to. As months passed, Mariah found herself reflecting on how far she had come. From a lonely woman searching for meaning in a bustling city, she had transformed into someone surrounded by love, acceptance, and purpose. Yet she knew the journey wasn't over. Building a family wasn't just about finding each other. It was about growing together, navigating challenges, and celebrating victories along the way. One crisp autumn morning, as leaves swirled in the wind outside Harold's window, Mariah stood in the kitchen preparing breakfast. Harold shuffled in, his hair tousled from sleep, and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You know," he said with a grin, "you've become quite the cook. Margaret would have been proud." Mariah laughed, flipping pancakes on the griddle. "Well, I had a great teacher." They ate together at the small kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the windows, casting golden patterns across the floor. For the first time in her life, Mariah felt truly at peace. She had found not just a family, but a place where she could thrive, a foundation built on love, resilience, and the unwavering belief that it's never too late to start anew.